You are watching France 24. Let's take a look at today's top stories. Egypt's former president Hosni Mubarak has died. He ruled the country for 30 years until his ouster in the 2011 Arab Spring. 7 people killed and dozens more hurt as riots break out in New Delhi. There's violent protests over a new citizenship law seen as being anti-Muslim, coming right in the middle of Donald Trump's first state visit to India. And over 80,000 people now infected by the coronavirus around the world, with close to 3,000 killed, mostly in the Chinese epicenter city of Wuhan. It's time for a business update with Stephen Carroll. Stephen, another volatile day on the stock markets because of coronavirus.
That's right. Now, Monday was the worst day for global shares in 2 years and the worst day for European markets in 4 years. Now, earlier on today, it did look like things were settling down, but European shares have dipped back into the red as the trading day has gone on. Now, the falls are not as severe as they were yesterday. We were looking at drops of 4 to 5% on these markets yesterday, but it seems we still haven't hit the floor for investor sentiment on this. If we take a look at some of the firms that saw major movements on Monday, the airline EasyJet down again today, over 2%. It fell 17% yesterday. The clothing retail group SMCP, which owns brands like Sandro, is down 7% in Paris. It warned earlier today that its sales in China and elsewhere had been significantly impacted by the coronavirus. And then if you look at a big manufacturer with operations in China, like the PSA Group, the car maker that owns Peugeot, its shares on the slide today as well.
Now, for many businesses, it's the steps taken to try and stop the spread of the virus that are actually causing the problems.
These companies are facing both a supply and a demand problem. On the one hand, people, particularly in China, aren't going out and spending. And on the other hand, businesses are facing shutdowns of Chinese suppliers for their goods. Also measures that were taken to stop the virus spreading among workers. It's a challenge that's facing the textile industry, among others, as Cold Stangler now reports.
Trouble for the garment industry as production in China stalls. According to the French Fashion Institute, just over a quarter of clothes sold in France are made in China. This wholesaler in the suburbs of Paris is getting worried. Many of his suppliers have had to halt production.
We have 400 brands today, and many of them source from China, some of them from Italy. We fear the worst if things continue like this.
Chinese factories have struggled to get up and running again. According to the government, just 3 in 10 small and medium-sized firms are back to work.
Deliveries are difficult. Orders for small and medium-sized businesses are on the rise, but there is no way to carry out production in time.
If the trend continues over the next couple of weeks, upcoming fall and winter collections could be delivered late to French stores. That's because after leaving the factory, it can take around 40 days for shipments by boat to arrive. For many businesses, delays are a hard pill to swallow.
It's a crisis on top of the crises we've gone through the last few years. First, there were the Yellow Vests, which was a crisis. Then all the strikes over retirement reform. Today, the crisis is over coronavirus.
To help firms weather the storm, the French government has extended measures deployed during those protests, including compensating workers for reduced hours and delaying payroll taxes.
Now, we're also keeping an eye on the price of oil today. It had tumbled in recent weeks as demand from China has fallen because of that shutdown. Brent crude trading around $56 a barrel. That's down from almost $69 a barrel in early January. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia's oil minister says that members of OPEC are watching developments closely on this. That could potentially mean another production cut if there's a further drop in demand.
Now, of course, all of this is a big challenge for governments to protect their economies. What can they do?
So already we've had China's government and central bank try to take steps to limit the economic impact of the outbreak in China. Policymakers around the world are trying to consider also their options. The traditional tools which help stimulate economies during a crisis, things like interest rate cuts from central banks or bond buying, don't really help in this situation because they stimulate demand and not supply. And outside of China, the big problem is supply. Those companies that aren't getting their supplies from China. Governments may have to step in to help businesses avoid bankruptcy during these difficult periods. Measures like tax breaks could help those who can't get supplies from China, but this is a temporary fix, and of course it comes at a cost to the taxpayer as well.
Another big story today, Donald Trump's visit to India, where there is some business being talked about there as well.
That's right. The trip meant to try and improve the country's economies after trade tensions had flared in recent weeks. Donald Trump giving a press conference in New Delhi right at the moment. Now, we did have some agreements announced earlier. Not a new trade deal, although some deals did get approved.
Behind the pageantry, getting down to business. On day 2 of Donald Trump's state visit to India, the U.S. president announced the sale of defense equipment worth more than $3 billion. That includes 24 helicopters from Lockheed Martin and a further 6 Apache helicopters made by Boeing. Meanwhile, with the thorny issue of trade in the spotlight, Trump sounded an optimistic note.
Prime Minister Modi is forging bilateral economic relationships that is fair and reciprocal. Our teams have made tremendous progress on a comprehensive trade agreement, and I'm optimistic we can reach a deal.
At the same time, Trump is poised to leave India without a trade deal, running up against New Delhi's own brand of protectionism. Over the last couple of years, the U.S. has hiked tariffs on 14% of Indian imports, while Prime Minister Narendra Modi has responded with new duties on about 6% of U.S. imports. And while talks have continued, key issues remain unresolved, including restrictions on American dairy products, U.S. medical devices, and e-commerce. Trump has aimed to cut Washington's trade deficit with India, though it's still standing at some $21 billion.
All right, just to wrap up now, travel website Expedia is making some major job cuts.
Some 3,000 jobs to go, according to reports in US media. That's in the company's offices around the world after what the firm said had had a disappointing performance in 2019. An email to staff said the decision was made after the company had grown in what was called an unhealthy and undisciplined way. Expedia chairman Barry Diller telling the Seattle Times that the newspaper, Seattle Times newspaper, that the move would simplify the business, which he's described as bloated in recent weeks. He's aiming to save up to $500 million in costs this year.
Stephen, thank you for that. Stephen Carroll with our look at your business news today on France 24.